All right, hey everyone. So today our lesson was on a reading about the Cold War, and I just wrote down a few main vocabulary or important terms that happened during the Cold War that are really important. So we're just gonna go over them as like a timeline of the Cold War. So as you can see already, it started with the Yalta Conference in 1945, and it ended when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. So obviously that's almost 50 years, it's around 46 years. That's a very long time. But the Cold War is a unique kind of war because it's not like that countries were at war always. It's that the war was less between like countries and more about uh, power and ideology. Because as you know, the U.S. Symbolized like capitalism, Western free speech thought, and things like that. And the Soviet Union symbolized communism. And at the time, it was very we didn't know who the superpower was, and both countries were fighting for that power in the world, which obviously had some very fatal consequences for many places. So um, Yalta is what a lot of people consider it to be the beginning. It was about a few months before Germany surrendered in World War II, and it was Truman, I think it was Churchill and Stalin, and they were discussing because they were the allies, right? They were the team that won. What are we going to do with the world after this war is over? And I guess there seemed to be a bit of a tension because Stalin was uh, seemed very his mindset on keeping his power and consolidating it in Europe. In Potsdam, after Germany surrendered, they discussed how to divide Germany up, and they divided it into four uh, parts, where each part would be controlled by one Allied power. But what ended up happening was that Stalin built a wall through around East Berlin, East Berlin, to keep like the other allies from helping them basically. So it's already there. Like Stalin is already on the opposing side of the allies. They're very isolated, and that's why the USSR had so many satellite countries. Is because Stalin was very paranoid, and he wanted to keep his nation uh, like like a buffer zone. He wanted a buffer zone so that Western thought would not like infiltrate the country. So he had many satellite nations like Poland, Belarus. I don't know about Belarus, but like Poland and there's other ones too. Anyway, so um, when we say Iron Curtain refers to, I think Winston Churchill said it when he came to the U.S. He said it, Iron Curtain. I forgot what he said, but basically, the divide between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, where Eastern Europe is controlled by Stalin's troops, and Western Europe is uh, like the West, basically. The divide is called the Iron Curtain, according to Winston Churchill. Containment policy is very important. This is the policy that the US took on to try to stop the spread of communism in the world. It means that rather than trying to push communism out completely, which might have very fatal consequences for the world, um, we should contain the spread and not let it spread. We keep the countries as they are now, but we do not let it spread any further. Um, as opposed to like their appeasement policy, which didn't work for Hitler a while ago. Okay, the Marshall Plan was a plan that the US developed to give aid to Western Germany. And Berlin at the time was controlled by Stalin. And one of the famous things that the US did was the Berlin airlift, where they just dumped a bunch of milk. I don't know if it was milk, but it was something on Berlin to give them food. Um, the arms race. This is very big. This is something that could have ended the war. It was the USSR and the USA were competing against nuclear bombs. Luckily, there were no other nuclear bombs that were detonated in wartime after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we came very close to it because we developed like hydrogen bombs, and those things can like literally annihilate the entire world. So it's just each country competing for power, and this was one of the ways. Another one of the ways was the space race, which is if they were able to control space, they were able to spy on their enemies. They were able to deploy missiles from anywhere they wanted, which is why the US basically had a mission to go to the moon, and why Russia did a bunch of satellites and stuff like that. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And Warsaw Pact is Eastern Europe equivalent of NATO. It was just it's basically just America's allies versus the Soviet Union's allies. Proxy wars were wars that were fought during where the deaths of Cold War came from. It's like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Afghanistan War. Those are proxy wars. They're civil wars fought by individual countries, but the superpowers of the Soviet Union and the USA took part in those because they want to make sure that their side wins. That's why the US wanted South Korea to beat North Korea in the Korean War. That's why the US wanted South Vietnam to beat North Vietnam in the Vietnam War, is because they want capitalism to prevail, basically. But obviously, Vietnam War didn't go so well. Korean War hasn't ended yet, technically. SALT 1 and SALT 2, this is when the Cold War began to, they say, thaw. Basically, tensions have eased, and Reagan and Gorbachev, I think, signed an agreement to reduce the amount of nuclear arms and missiles that each country has, because obviously they're getting a lot. Strategic Defense Initiative was another Reagan plan to defend against the Soviets by shooting down their missiles before they land here. And then finally in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves because the USSR is bankrupt, basically. They had to open up to Western thought and a little bit of capitalism because communism was not working that well in their country. So they didn't really have any money. So Gorbachev opened the country a little bit, and ultimately they had to dissolve the Soviet Union, but that marked the end of the Cold War, basically. So I hope that was a comprehensive history lesson of the Cold War, and thank you for watching.